Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Peachy for Biology Summer School, giving you a video tutorial of the cell. So we're going to go ahead and talk not just about animal cells, but plant cells and the simplest type of cells that come from bacteria. Okay, so just a little bit on the history of the cell here. Cells were first observed using microscopes, which is probably pretty obvious considering they're really small. And today we have several types of microscopes. Light microscopes, which is what you guys will be using in class, and we did a bit of a tutorial for that prior to this one. There are also phase contrast microscopes and electron microscopes, which basically just use electrons that they bounce off of what they're viewing rather than beams of light. Robert Hooke first discovered the cell in cork. They were dead, but he was able to see that, this is a picture that he drew, he was able to see that the cork that he was looking at under the microscope was made up of these little individual compartments, aka cells, which is where the name came from. However, this is part of the bark of a tree, which those types of cells are dead, so he wasn't able to observe many of the characteristics of living cells. His microscope wouldn't have been super powerful. Okay, then we have Anton van Leeuwenhoek, and he was able to first see living organisms under the microscope, looking at pond water and blood. Magnified that 300 times, and was able to see that there were living organisms that were made completely of cells, able to see the blood, that it was composed of individual cells, and also able to see many of the internal compartments of cells. So following this, we get the cell theory, and I'm sorry about keep dragging my picture out of the way, but this is Schleiden and Schwann, and they propose that all things are made of cells, all living things are made of cells. It's a basic unit of life, and that cells produce other cells. So that's where cells come from, is through cell reproduction. Okay, here's light microscope view of human hair, and this one is an electron microscope, so we can see here the big difference in the magnification between these two types of microscopes. There's pluses and minuses using them. You can see under a light microscope, it's easier to use, it's cheaper to use. You can see things that are alive under electron microscopes because of the nature of the scope itself. Depending on if it's a scantron or it's a transmission electron microscope, you have to make special, very, very thin mounts for those transmission electron microscopes. And typically, I believe what's in there has to be dead. So, okay. I went through that rather quickly because I want to spend time going through cells. And we've got two main types of cells. We've got prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotes are bacteria, and eukaryotes are all other types of cells. Okay, so prokaryotes are simple. They would have been around first, evolutionarily speaking. They are made up of basically a cell wall, cell membrane, cytoplasm, ribosomes, and some DNA. Whereas eukaryotic cells have their DNA enclosed in a nucleus. They have little bitty organelles, which each is responsible for a specific function of the cell. And they have single-celled eukaryotic organisms. Mostly protists are the single-celled eukaryotic organisms. Otherwise, multicellular organisms like plants, fungi, and animals are made up of eukaryotic cells. So here is a general animal cell, and we'll be going through some of these organelles in a little bit. Here is your nucleus, and here's like the DNA inside the nucleus. You'll notice it's not a very regular geometric shape. In this case, it actually has a flagella, and it is covered with a semi-permeable membrane, which we're going to spend some time going through in an upcoming video. The plant cell is a lot more structured, more rigid in structure. It has a cell wall made up of cellulose, and it also has a semi-permeable cell membrane here. It oftentimes will have a large central vacuole, which is filled with nutrients and water for the most part. Animal cells can have vacuoles, but they're not usually as big as the ones in plant cells. Plant cells also have chloroplasts, which is where photosynthesis takes place, and that is different from animal cells. As we mentioned, prokaryotic cells just have cytoplasm. They have ribosomes, which is the site of cellular translation, so it's where protein synthesis is done. And they have cell walls and cell membranes, but those cell walls are made up of something other than the stuff that makes up plant cell walls. Alright, spending the last few minutes going over these kinds of organelles. First of all, we have the cell membrane, which is super important. We're going to spend an entire class period talking about how stuff gets in and out of a cell, so I'm not going to go through it in a ton of detail here, but realize that this is where, most of the lipids that you eat go, so it's a fatty layer. It's water phobic. Well, the little tails of your lipid bilayer are water phobic and the heads are water philic. Water phobic means water fearing. Water philic means water loving. So basically the reason why they are oriented the way they are is because the tails actually are repelled by water. And since your body's made up of lots and lots of water, that's about as far away as it can get from water. So stuff can move in and out of the cell, really small things. Bigger things have a harder time moving in and out of the cell, and they need to go through some of these little protein tunnels almost that occur in the lipid bilayer, and that's going to regulate passage of larger stuff in and out of the cell. Alright, cytoplasm is the fluid portion. It kind of is a transit system in a way. Stuff travels through the cytoplasm. It's also sometimes filled with ions and nutrients and that kind of stuff. And we have the nucleus, which lies at the center of the cell, and this is where you have the DNA, which encodes for all of you, all of the organisms, anything basically. And within the nucleus is the nucleolus, and that's the manufacturing site for ribosomes. So we can see ribosomes here. They are free-floating in the cytoplasm, but they are also found embedded on this funky-looking, kind of twisty organelle called the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And this is where proteins are made. So remember we talked about proteins. It makes up your muscles, your skin, your hair, your nails, and lots of other things, enzymes, all sorts of fun stuff. Well, that's where all that is made, on those ribosomes. Okay, speaking of the endoplasmic reticulum, it's a series of folded sacs, and it's kind of like the highway system. There's a little bit of a difference. We have rough endoplasmic reticulum, which has ribosomes attached to it, and smooth, which doesn't have ribosomes, and it basically just detoxifies lipids, takes away some toxins out of your body, so it's not to do with protein synthesis. Okay, there's your smooth ER. Looks a little bit like coral, if you ask me. Mitochondria is your powerhouse of the cell. This is where, oops, let's go back a slide here. This is where aerobic respiration takes place. So we'll spend an entire video talking about aerobic respiration as well. But this is basically where ATP is made, and that's where you get, well, how you take the food that you eat and extract the energy from it. So you need those. It's really important to have these mitochondria. And you got a bunch of them in your cells. There's not just one. And some cells have way more, like your muscles have tons of mitochondria. Okay? Feel free, remember, to pause this as you're going to write down some of these notes if you need it. All right, Golgi apparatus. This is like a packaging center. It's where vesicles are made to send stuff out of the cell. So it's going to take things that are made in the cell, the proteins and things like that, and it's going to package them into these little vesicles. And it's going to take those vesicles and send them out of the cell through exocytosis. Well, the exocytosis takes place at the membrane, but the Golgi apparatus is where those little vesicles are formed. Here we go. Info on the vesicles. I have a lot of pictures on here. Okay, and lysosomes. Lysosome is supposed to be like the recycling center of the cell. It takes stuff the cell doesn't need anymore. It digests that into smaller molecules and basic nutrients the cell needs, and it allows the cell to then use some of that nutrients for building more parts it does need. I just chuckle because I have to keep moving my picture all the way around. Alright, so then we have centrioles. This is part of the cytoskeleton, and I believe I have cytoskeleton listed here. So this is basically what gives the cell more structure, so it's not just some gelatinous blob. It's especially important during cell division because the cell needs to be, you need to move around all those chromosomes. You need to split the cell and that kind of stuff. So they play a huge role in cell division. And we've talked about that vacuole. Probably don't need to talk about it anymore. And here we have a cell wall in a plant cell. It's made up of cellulose. In fungi cells, it's made up of chitin. In bacteria cells, it's made up of a kind of carbohydrate, but I don't know what that is. And it gives structure to the organism. Okay, that cellulose, by the way, is just true of plant cells. Finally, chloroplasts, which are found only in plant cells. They take energy from the sun and they convert it into sugar in a process called photosynthesis. And we will spend an entire video going through photosynthesis too, so just going to mention it briefly here. Some cells have specialized appendages, either flagella or cilia. These are flagella, they're like little tails, and cilia are more like, we had them in a picture with the bacteria earlier. Where are you, bacteria? My goodness, there's lots of stuff on here. One was about to, there we go. There's our bacteria cell with the cilia there. And then its little flagella. Okay, now I gotta go all the way back to the end in just a minute. Okie dokie. Almost there. Alright, and so here is a summary of the different organelles and their functions. And I'm not going to go through this because we kind of talked about it, but again, if you want to pause the video at this point and kind of go through some of those functions, that would be great. It's a good way to kind of test yourself to make sure you know the functions of each of these components of the cell. Alright everybody, that is it for this video summary. And the next one will probably be about osmosis, diffusion, and active transport. Bye everyone.